Hi gang, on the Joy of Football podcast this week, two more Last Trophy segments analysing teams going into the Premier League season. This week's teams are Chelsea, Crystal Palace, Everton, Fulham and Ipswich. The second alphabetical block, if you like. In between those, we have Martin Tyler's letter from the Gantry, in which he talks about a player who shares his birthday and has moved for a load of money this summer. Three of the best, young player, old player, and player. Each of us giving you one. That's 6 players in all. Voice of Passion are my predictions for the Premier League season, and Martin's weariness at people making predictions. And we finish with Stoppage Time, talking about Real Madrid playing with Kylian Mbappe as a centre forward. If you want to get more involved, look at Patreon. If you want to read us as opposed to listen to us, as opposed to only listen to us, go on substack.com, where the Joy of Football has the writings of Martin, his letters, and me, my musings. Otherwise, stay where you are, listen, watch, enjoy. The Joy of Football podcast. With me, Neil Barnett.
And with me, Martin Tyler.
Looks like Xavi! Ready! Aguero!
The Joy of Football. Hello, the Joy of Football podcast with Martin Tyler, the greatest commentator in the world, and me, Neil Barnett, goes into the 2024-25 European season, fully match fit and ready for the hard slog, aren't we?
We put a lot of minutes in during the summer, that's for sure. So I guess we are, yeah.
Right.
We've got to go and prove it now.
Okay. Well, we're going to start by continuing with our preview of the clubs in the Premier League this season. Now, if you were watching the last podcast, you'll know that we covered 5 clubs: Arsenal, Aston Villa, Bournemouth, Brentford and Brighton, and we're going to cover the next 5 in alphabetical order today. If you weren't watching the last podcast, you fool. Okay.
They might have just been listening to it though, Neil.
True. In which case
you're not a fool.
You're very intelligent, yeah. And we're looking at our previews through the last trophies of the clubs. The first one today is my club, Chelsea. And Martin, the last trophy was the FIFA Club World Cup of 2022. But do you include that when it's only 2 games?
Yes.
Okay, that's it.
And are we going to include it? Is it going to be played
next time?
There are 32 teams.
Yeah. The last league...
Chelsea are in it, by the way. That's why I made that point.
The last league triumph by Chelsea is a long time ago now, 2017. But of course, the last European trophy was the UEFA Super Cup in 2021 on the back of winning the Champions League in 2021.
And how that team has been dismantled or disintegrated, whatever word you want to use about that team.
Only Reece James and Ben Chilwell really remain, and Ben Chilwell hasn't started a game in pre-season and hasn't been involved in 4 of them, and is clearly not wanted.
And Reece is injured again, I believe, isn't he? And he's also got a 3-game ban to start the season as well.
Well, the 3 games left over of a 4-game ban.
Yeah.
Were you surprised that the progress Chelsea made in the last 2-3 months of last season and the changes that have taken place subsequently in summer?
Yes and no. I think the quality of the manager and the coaches suggested that was always a possibility. Their ability to work with young players, which is very much the Chelsea model at the moment. It was some of the games were sensational. You know, players stepped up, like Cole Palmer in particular. So the surprise was that they're not being allowed to continue in the job, and so the pressure is now on a new manager who obviously had a very good season himself last season, Enzo Maresca, and to see whether he can find that touch as a less experienced manager compared to Pochettino.
Right, I've got 2 questions. Cole Palmer was one of the best players in the Premier League last season, shortlisted for the Player of the Year, PFA Player of the Year, one of the 6. He at times towards the end of the season, for me, hit what you call world-class quality, world-class form. But you're not world-class when you've had one great season. And how much more difficult is the second season when everyone knows how you play? Because football defenders in the Premier League are very football intelligent.
I think Cole is very football intelligent as well. And I think just so the defenders be working how to stop his A game, if you like, he'll be working on improving his A game. He's a very ambitious young man, and rightly so. He's got the tools to have the ambition. He's not whistling in the wind in that respect. So I think it'll be fascinating. It's never so easy the second time around, but the great players find a way. And I think, yes, it would be too premature to call him a great player at the moment, but he's certainly got the potential to be a really great player. And watching that story unfold will be part of the joy of what you'll be doing a lot of the time this season, which is watching the club that defies the rest of us in terms of logic, the rest of us that don't follow Chelsea, how this has gone on for years and years and years. And it's a far cry from some of the Chelsea teams that I, by just the dint of my job, going to games where they're in the second tier and the club was on the verge of being bankrupt, all the crises that I suppose make this a melodrama, really. And we'll see what the next year brings.
Well, I think the DNA of the club has changed. That's not surprising with the sanctions that the government brought against Roman Abramovich. But I always go back to the first press conference of Jose Mourinho, when, of course, it's legendary now because of his "I am not of a bottle, I am a special one" statement. But at that press conference, which obviously I was there, he said something far more important to me as a Chelsea supporter. And he said, when I leave this club, I want to have changed the identity. And I want the identity to be winners. People forget that. Far more important than the special one. And boy, oh boy, did Chelsea become winners. All the way up to 2021 and the Champions League. I don't really include the UEFA Super Cup and the Club World Cup, 3 games between them as 2 trophies. Lovely though they were. And since then, Chelsea haven't won anything. Now, in fact, in the first 2 years of Clearlake, Eghbali, Burley owning the club in consequence to buying it off Abramovich, it's the first time since the last year of Ken Bates and the first year of Abramovich that Chelsea have gone 2 years without winning a trophy.
Aren't you a lucky person? I speak for the rest of the football fans who don't support these elite clubs. As a Woking supporter and non-league fan in that sense, it's ridiculous for you to even think that, to be honest with you. Much as I love you and I totally respect your opinions, it's ridiculous.
It is.
Because there are so few trophies to win, there's so much competition, and if a couple of years is a lean spell, goodness knows what you'd be like after 5.
When you spend £1.5 billion on players, pounds, I mean, I don't know what's going on. I do not believe
that's a different argument.
I do not believe it's got anything to do with football. Whether it's something financially not very nice or whether it's just addiction, I do not know. But what I do know is that if you insist on having a lot of transfers, it costs you as a business a lot of money. It costs you in scouting. It costs you in administration. It costs you in taxes. It costs you in shipping people from country to country. It is expensive. So I have this simple question. Who would you rather have as your central defensive squad going into a season? Would you rather have Disasi, Badiashile, Tosin and Colwell? Or would you rather have Tomori, Gahey, Chalobah and Colwell, 4 homegrown players without all the costs that have recruited the others? And for me, Chalobah and Gahey, you're in. You'd be the 2. Or maybe Tomori and Gahey, but none of the purchase players.
The only thing I'd add to that, Neil, is it must be very unsettling being a Chelsea player at the moment, especially a young Chelsea player, because there's so many bodies in the building to start with, and how even with a fatted up managerial staff, you can't be managed on a daily basis, so that these guys may be a lot better than they're showing in games because they're not in the ideal situation to be given the confidence to which all players need. However much you watch them on the field and think they're strutting their stuff, deep down they've got the same human feelings as the rest of us. And I think if you can't give them that, then you have a problem to start with. I do think if the playing staff was trimmed to what we would call reasonable numbers, and then they could manage there would be individual time for the players to be dealt with. They get a lot more out of the ones that they chose to keep. But at the moment, it's a scattergun approach, and I think it's going to leave some casualties.
I think Chelsea will do well to finish sixth again, like last season. But I think they need to win the UEFA Conference because they are so much higher finance than any other club in it. It would be inexcusable if they didn't.
So speaks our Chelsea fan. I think they'll probably do something around that. Too much talent, really. They're going to get some very talented players on the pitch. I just think a trimmed down Chelsea would have a better chance of getting into the top four because the ability, some of the players that they have chosen are not yet up to scratch, but they're young. And you've made points in this podcast a lot about the 21 to 24. A lot of them aren't in that. They're in that growing period, and that by the time they get 24, they might be superstars. So,
or they might be 21-year-olds who didn't quite cut it.
Well, they might be lumbering Chelsea with the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th year of their long contracts, that they don't want them anymore, and then that's another difficult.
That's all right. They'll go and send them to train with the under-21s or with the "we don't want you anymore" group.
That would be a bigger group than the ones that are playing, won't it?
Yeah.
But listen, we're very Chelsea-centric because of Neil's tremendous knowledge of the club.
Addiction.
Yeah, all those things as well, but tremendous knowledge as well, inside knowledge too. So we'll see. But they are only one of 20 teams that we're talking about.
So let's move on to the next one. Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace have been in the Football League or the Premier League since 1920 and have won very, very few trophies. The last one they actually won was Division 1, which in those days would have been the third tier. In 1994, actually that might have been the second tier in 1994. Their best ever FA Cup was, of course, runners-up in 1990 and 2016, Steve Coppell and Alan Pardew. And their best league finish, 1991, Right and Bright. And of course, Steve Coppell, third in the league. And we mustn't forget, to be fair to them, they have won, not a major trophy, but they won the Full Members' Cup in 1991, which wasn't an easy trophy to win. Crystal Palace, who are now sell our best player every year, Wilfried Zaha a year ago, Michael O'Leary.
Let's talk about Wilf coming back, isn't there?
Yeah.
So, and they haven't sold Gay yet. Elise's gone. I think of all the young talent they had there, he was the most likely. He was using, not in a nasty way, but because he gave plenty to Palace, but a stepping stone to greater ambitions. But they had a wonderful season that season, and I was actually with Mark Bright a few days ago I watched the Palace under-21 team play, and the love that somebody like that has for the club. And Steve Coppell's still about. He goes to watch non-league football. I see him from time to time. With Alan Smith, the other Alan Smith, not the my FIFA colleague Alan Smith, the Alan Smith who managed when Steve stood down. They're great football people, and they're really loving what Palace are achieving. And we've talked about, Adam Wharton is a star in the making. Munoz, who was signed with a little caveat. He's got a ricket in him, but the truth is, for what you could pay for what you get, he hasn't shown that he hasn't made a mistake. I think he's been tremendous. So they produce players, and they at the moment are buying well, and they've got a bright young manager who's still enthralled, I'm sure, by the chance to managing the Premier League, and he's a winner. He's won a trophy.
With Eintracht Frankfurt won the Europa League. That is some achievement, because Eintracht Frankfurt don't win trophies.
Was it 12 years in a row in the Premier League? I think that's worthy of a trophy in itself. I lived in South London for quite a long time. I met an ex-black cab driver the other day, and I said, you lot never took me to South London and never go south of the river. And he said, oh, I'm sure they did. I said, no, I'm telling you. But that was a long time ago. So South London is not, it's not got the riches, and the football club obviously reflect the area as well. I think Palace are doing brilliantly. South London deserves to have a club up there in the limelight, and Palace are pushing hard for that. So a trophy is probably asking a bit too much, but you mentioned Alan Pardew got them to the final. He played in the final, of course.
Played in the final, got them to the final, and their second highest ever finish is 10th, which I think they've done 3 times. And he was the manager the time before last season when Glasner, on the back of Roy Hodgson, did it, so
there it's exciting. But if they have to sell before the end of August, if they have to sell Gay and maybe somebody else as well, then I would temper my remarks. But as it stands, and they were a great watch last season. They played some terrific football, even when Roy was still there. When he got Eze and Elise on the pitch at the same time, and then Mateta, who we talked about last week in the podcast, who's going to come back eventually after his Olympic excellence with France. He's really having. If we're looking for a player of the calendar year outside the normal candidates, I'd push him to that. He's having a great time.
I just want to bring up one thing. Palace and the next club we're going to look at, Everton, have got the 2 most old-fashioned stadia in the Premier League. Pillars still.
Well, Everton not for much longer.
No, well, I'll believe it when it actually happens.
Well, you're not the first person to have said that.
But if the stadia is decrepit, the atmosphere is brilliant in both those stadia.
Yeah, it is. It's actually, for a long time I said that my favourite Gantry to commentate in English football was Anfield, the old, before they built the big stand. That it was just a truly wonderful position. And now the best one is Palace. You're right in the thick of what you're describing. You're in front, the fans are behind you, really. Fans of both clubs, so you get a sprinkling, or more than a sprinkling, you get both ears full of noise. And so, it's they've made it a difficult place for the opposition to come to, which it should have been for years, I suppose, because it isn't unpretentious, shall we say. And you can always go into the store that adjoins the club and top up with your snacks for the game as well, but probably not in the calibre of food that you eat. Yeah. But for us poor working commentators, a couple of bars of chocolate will sometimes do.
So Palace to survive, okay.
Yes,
I agree. Well, let's move on to Everton. Amazingly, no trophy this century. Last trophy, the FA Cup in 1995. Last league triumph, 1987. Last European triumph, the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1985. And your mate Andy Gray, I think, was in
it was the game that the most Everton fans associate me with really is the semi-final second leg against Bayern Munich, and Andy terrorised them, absolutely terrorised them, and it was a 0-0 the away game, and they won 3-1. I think they were a goal down in the game, and Andy would be the first to tell you that the referee adopted a fairly lenient approach to the physicality of the game. And he was a barnstorming player, and coming towards the end of maybe the full powers, because he was only at Everton a short time, but goodness me, they coincided with trophies. Howard Kendall, manager, and great camaraderie, great fellowship now. Still, sadly, we've lost Howard, but still, the players have a reunion to celebrate the last reunion. I think it's wonderful fun. And that night, I'll never forget that I had to interview a loser, and Søren Lerby, the Danish international, was a lovely guy, was playing for Bayern that night. He was pushed out for the rest of the team to face the music, so to speak. And when he went back in, they'd gone. they were staying overnight. They hadn't gone back to Germany, but they just packed up and left in high dudgeon, really. And I had to drive Soren back into the team hotel, which was very pleasant for me, probably not so pleasant for him. So yeah, that was a special night, a really special night. But Everton, there's something about them. There's a grittiness, and Sean Dyche probably. I've spoken up for him on this podcast. Well, right at the beginning when we started, what an amazing managerial job he's done all the time he's been there, but particularly in the recent circumstances where they've had him points deducted. So they'll battle on, and Joe Royle had the same when he was manager. Who was the manager when they won that FA Cup that you mentioned? He didn't like it, the Dogs of War. They didn't like it really, although it was quite a nice sort of almost a backhanded compliment of how they competed, But they fought hard, and Sean's team fights hard.
Everton were one of the big five when the Premier League started. It was Liverpool, Everton, Manchester United, Tottenham, Arsenal. They were the big five.
They were also before that when live television started on ITV in the 80s, and the snatch of the day from Greg Dyke and his ITV executives. They were, I think it might have been a big six then, but they were certainly in that as well. So, and through the 80s, I mean, we're talking about that. They
won two league trophies and the Cup Winners' Cup in the 80s.
And the FA Cup.
And in the 60s, they won two league trophies, 69, 70. If you include that, two league trophies and an FA Cup. If you remember Everton as a big club, you'll be 55 or over. If you're 45 or under, they have just been. Well, was it Benitez, who was a Liverpool manager, once described them as a small club, and then went on to manage them and got absolute loathing when he got there from all the Everton supporters.
I often wonder what Everton would have done in the recent times if it hadn't been in the same city as Liverpool. There is now a sort of a resentment, really, I think, from the Evertonians.
Chelsea played Everton in 2009 at Stamford Bridge in a league game towards the end of the season, and it was already a Chelsea-Everton FA Cup final at Wembley. And I went out on the pitch to do all the hosting and the teams and everything beforehand, and I said, "Welcome to Everton, supporters, and congratulations on being the last team in Liverpool this season with the opportunity to win a trophy." I think I made some Everton friends for life.
Yeah, they would have loved that.
But I want to say three things about Everton. First of all, when Liverpool was the European city of culture and they did up the area that is Liverpool 1, Everton put a shop in that area, and they've got a shop near the ground. So they called the shop Everton 2 because the one near the ground was Everton 1. And that made the address Everton 2, Liverpool 1, which I thought was absolutely brilliant.
Well, they're not short of sense of humour there, but sometimes it's gallows humour from the Evertonians.
But I just want to bring up two things. Someone said to me, who works at Everton, that the difference between Sean Dyche and his predecessors, who would have been Rafa Benitez, Frank Lampard,
Carlo Ancelotti
and Marco Silva, was that all
Roberto
those managers
Martinez as well.
Well, yeah, but that was he was before Sam Allardyce, so it's that period. That all those four managers tried to set them up to play good football and win games, and they simply weren't good enough. Whereas Sean Dyche has come in, looked at them and thought, "Oh my God, we'll set them up not to lose games," and they've been a much more strong, resilient side as a result. And the other thing, which I think is really interesting, everyone talks about their spirit, and obviously the home support and everything else in the old stadium, but everyone talks about their spirit. And I did an interview last season with James Tarkowski, and he said, "Yeah, we have that spirit. We don't do anything special. We don't go out for meals. We don't go out and do paintballing as a group. We don't do any of that. The spirit is built on the training session every day, and the manager emphasizes that every day."
Yeah, well, that's it's the way perhaps they have to do it. I mean, they're not flamboyant people, are they? They're strong, proper professional. I mean, it's great to quote James, because you'd want him standing behind you if you had to go into a battle anywhere, standing alongside of you. He's a top. He's a top footballer in the sense that he's got a lot of. He's played for England, but he's got that extra X factor determination that you think everybody has, but they don't quite have. And sometimes it's a bit of an act of bravado, but the truth is that's him to the core. And he's that's a good quote, by the way. I didn't know that they didn't. I'm sure they must have been out once or twice.
And the worst thing about Everton is that the chippy opposite Goodison Park put sultanas in its curry sauce. I'm just not having that at all. Not having that at all. Okay, we'll come back to Last Trophy and do two more clubs a little bit later. Who we got? Fulham and Ipswich coming up. But we're going to move on now, and we're going to move on to a kind of birthday special. That's the story, not the date at the moment. Letter from the Gantry by Martin Tyler.
Letter from the Gantry.
Oh, thanks, Neil. I guess it's one of the commentator's staple facts, birthdays. In my first commentary outing of the season, the Community Shield, Bernardo Silva of Manchester City came on with 10 minutes to go to score the equalising goal, picked up a booking, was the only City player to fail from the spot in the subsequent shootout, but still ended up with a winner's medal, all on his 30th birthday. And when a player's special day falls on the same day as one's own birthday, never mind the year, you tend to sit up and take notice. That's one reason why I've taken a close interest in the career of Dominic Solanke, born on September the 14th, 1997, my 52nd birthday, and the 41st of Chelsea legend Ray Wilkins. Ray and I would text each other regularly on that specific date. His 61st birthday, sorrowfully, turned out to be the final time. It was at Chelsea, of course, where we first heard of Dominic Solanke. Not when he joined the club as an under-8, possibly when his two late goals completed a remarkable win for the Young Blues in the second leg of the 2014 FA Youth Cup final, coming from 2 goals down to beat local rivals Fulham. Very probably when he finished the following season with 41 goals in the under-18 and under-21 teams to be crowned Chelsea's first ever Academy Player of the Year. He was also an FA Youth Cup winner that season too, scoring once more in the final, this time against Manchester City. During that season, Solanke was also given his first team debut, 5 weeks after his 17th birthday. Jose Mourinho sent him on as a 73rd minute substitute for the Brazilian Oscar against the Slovenian club Maribor in the Champions League. He came on at 4-0 up. It finished 6-0, 2 Eden Hazard goals while he was on the pitch. The television highlights show that wearing number 35, he was quickly on the scene to join in the Belgian celebrations. No one that night, certainly not Dominic himself, could have imagined that those 17 minutes would be his only ever appearance in a competitive first-team game for Chelsea. The following season, he was loaned to the Dutch club Vitesse, where he played regularly. Back at Chelsea for the 2016-17 campaign, he was an unused substitute for a League Cup tie, but suggestions that he would leave at the end of that season decreased his chances of selection for the Premier League. A switch to Liverpool was already in the pipeline in the summer of 2017, when he starred as England became world champions at under-20 level. Dominic Solanke was the winner of the Golden Ball, awarded to the player of the tournament, high praise. It seemed a perfect platform for his arrival at Anfield. It was Jurgen Klopp's second full season in charge, lots of optimism. Solanke made his Premier League debut as a substitute at home to Crystal Palace a month before his 20th birthday. He came on a couple of minutes before Sadio Mane netted the only goal of the game. And wearing number 29 this time, his presence helped the ball fall for the scorer. But he still hadn't started a Premier League game when Gareth Southgate, short of forwards for an England friendly against Brazil in November 2017, upgraded Dominic from the under-21 squad. And he got a cap, a 75th minute sub this time for Jamie Vardy. He had a late chance to win that game, actually, that finished goalless. It remains his only England appearance. It was becoming an intriguing journey. Lots of potential, but in reality, just an occasional episode of 15 minutes of fame. He did start 5 Premier League games under Klopp to add to 16 outings from the bench. In the last game of that season, he finally scored his first Premier League goal. It was a fine strike too, in a 4-0 win over Brighton at Anfield. I was commentating for Sky Sports and proclaimed that finally getting on the score sheet would have him off and running in his Liverpool career. He never played for the club again. As soon as the winter transfer window of 2019 opened, he was offloaded to Bournemouth. A month later, he did play again at Anfield for the Cherries in a 3-0 defeat. But again, he became a symbol for a non-scoring forward. With the schedule at that time ravaged by COVID, his first Bournemouth Premier League goals came 18 months after he joined the club and couldn't save them from relegation. 2 seasons in the Championship were tough for Bournemouth, but they saw the years of potential turn into performance for Dominic Solanke, playing regularly, starting 84 of those 92 games in the second tier. He scored 44 goals in total, 29 of them in the promotion campaign of 21-22. After that, he became a cornerstone of a remarkable survival in the top flight under Gary O'Neill, followed by a swaggering season for the club, inspired by a new head coach, Anthony Iraola. Solanke netted 19 Premier League goals, more than double the tally in his previous career. The only Englishman to score more in the league last season was Cole Palmer for Chelsea. Talk to of an England recall, getting on for 7 years since that only cap. A tale of consternation and cameos has now become a story of substance, emphasised by his £55 million transfer to Tottenham Hotspur. I'm commentating on Spurs' opening game at Leicester, and maybe we'll see the start of the next chapter of this extraordinary journey for Dominic Solanke. Oh, and for the record, Tottenham were scheduled to play on this upcoming September the 14th, a Saturday, but the fixture has been switched to the Sunday. So Dom's celebrations will have to be reined in, coming on the eve of his first North London derby. But at the moment, every day must feel like a birthday. Solanke, so long in development, now has his time to shine.
Yes. Yes, obviously I knew Dominic when he was 15 and coming through. Just a very talented, intelligent footballer, good movement and everything. I'm not sure that his personality was ready. I believe that as a centre forward, you have got to want to top the bill. You have got to love the limelight.
And of course, alongside him was Tammy Abraham, who probably
had
have that
he
want
had
to top the bill
qualities.
mentality.
I had all those qualities.
Yeah.
But Dominic was one of the first players, really, when the pressure was coming on English clubs not to sign even European players after Brexit before the age of 18. He was one of the young English youngsters coming through who looked at what his club had and said, no one's going to get a look in here, I'm off. So when you said that he spent that whole year not getting a first team chance, he didn't actually play at all. He didn't play for the under, I think it was 23s and 21s now, either because he wouldn't sign a new contract. Chelsea weren't a lovely club then either. And he left at the end of the season and went to Liverpool in order, he thought, to get more opportunity. So one of the interesting developments of the last 10 years since, or 8 years really, since Brexit was first voted for, is that a lot of youngsters now are saying, nah, don't rate at this club. We're going to move on to another club. And of course, the big clubs get the checkbooks out when they hear things like that and attract these people.
I'd love to know what actually the compensation was that Liverpool had to pay to Chelsea, because that's all it was, wasn't it? Yeah, there was no transfer fee or anything. No. And they got 17 million for him, I think, from Bournemouth. But now where he has developed that personality,
they get 15-20% of this sale.
Yeah, and they get. But you mentioned that he was slightly diffident in his makeup. He's not like that now. He's got. You can say I just watched Spurs TV do a great show, and they showed him arriving at the club, his medical, and the way he met players like James Maddison, big personalities in the Spurs dressing room, and he was very much his own man. And it's good. It's taken a time, and I think his football will reflect that. And I'll be fascinated to see. Obviously, he's got a bit of competition, but Richarlison's been a bit in and out, hasn't he? Son prefers playing on the left. And he's maybe got that ability to drop into midfield that Harry Kane had.
I think he'll make Tottenham a better team, but we'll come on to that later when in stoppage time, we're going to talk about Real Madrid, who don't have a Dominic Solanke type player. So stay tuned. Right, letter from the Gantry, which of course you can read as well now on Substack.com, where we've got the Joy of Football site with the writing of Martin and myself. Go on that, or just have a big hole in your life. Right, still to come, three of the best, young player, old player, voice of passion, my predictions for top four and relegation, which Martin will belittle, and stoppage.
No, he won't commit. Martin won't commit. That's the story of my career. Once you say someone's going to win the league at the beginning of the season, you've got to live with that for the whole year.
Well, he always said, whenever he came on radio with me, he always said, I'm a commentator. I report on what's happening.
I react to what has happened, not tell you what's going to happen. That's Neil's skill.
Yeah. Okay. He's a coward. Moving on and back to last trophy. Fulham. I was quite surprised, actually, by some of these, but not by Fulham. Fulham won the championship in 2022 to get promotion back to the Premier League.
It's a yo-yoing.
The yo-yo period. Their best FA Cup performance was 1975 when they were runners-up.
I just remind you, I think we've mentioned it on this podcast, I was privileged to travel on the team bus to Wembley with
Bobby Moore, Alan Mallory,
and some great people. It was a wonderful experience, and they lost the game, but still had the better celebrations that they lost to West Ham.
Their best league position, 2011, under Roy Hodgson, when they came 8th, and we mustn't forget that in 2010. Unbelievably, possibly Roy Hodgson's greatest achievement, they reached the Europa League final and had a wonderful victory over Juventus at Craven Cottage on the way there. That was 2010. Fulham is a different experience, I always think, to going to any other club in the country. Can I just say, the roads leading down to Craven Cottage off the Fulham Palace Road are in alphabetical order. And I used to live in Inglethorpe Street, back in the 1980s. And when in those days, I very rarely went to Fulham, though I was sports editor of the local paper, so I did sometimes. And the Fulham support base then was very old and not in the best physical health.
I'd been in love with Johnny Haynes and all those characters
and
that
the Fulham,
with him.
If you go down to Craven Cottage now, I promise you, it is the most middle class clientele support in the country.
It's funny. There's one in non-league now, Dulwich Hamlet, and I don't know whether yuppies is still a term, but I think it might apply. And you're allowed to drink, of course, in the full site of the stadium in the Isthmian League, which they are now, and I think maybe in the National League now, but certainly in the Isthmian League. And my pal Alan Dowson, the manager that I've worked with all these years, went to see them play in the week, and he said it was infuriating, the clinking of glasses behind him. And
they all wine glasses rather than beer glasses.
And they all go into Dulwich Village afterwards, all the fans, which is a very high-class part of South London, having said that there are parts of South London that aren't so high-class, the parts I used to live in. And they'll be sitting out, especially this time of year, they'll all be sitting out, carrying on clinking of the glasses with fine bottles of wine on the table and everything. But Fulham, of course, Fulham are now rebuilding the stadium to make it the bits happily untouched. Of course, the great cottage itself is a listed building, and I think the facade at the front on the road there, Stevenage Road, is it? Yeah. But now the big stand on the far side with the swimming pool on the top and the capacity, I don't know whether it's fully open yet. The stand isn't fully open, but to be able to walk down on the bank, you know that area better than I do now, but walk from Putney Bridge to Hammersmith Bridge, which is it's just a wonderful part of London. So it's sort of some of it, because I first went there when Woking weren't playing in the 1960s. I first went, Woking played in an amateur cup semi-final there in 1958. and drew with Barnett and had the replay at Brentford and won the replay and won the final. And but it's changed so much. I learnt about football wit and humour there, because I mentioned Johnny Haynes. He was such a star. He was playing for England, and the rest of them,
captain of England.
Yeah, captain of England. The rest of them were, to say they were journeymen is a bit unfair, but they were.
Well, Bobby, that 1960s team, Bobby Robson played for them. I mean, featuring
they were in the old First
George
Division.
Cohen, of course, was the right back in the World Cup.
But they had players who, how shall I say, amused the Fulham fans. Probably these gentlemen that were ladies, of course, who were, maybe you were talking about in the 80s. They were in their pomp as Fulham supporters in the 60s. And I mean, if social media is now the way to do it, it wasn't then. It was your voice. And if Tosh Chamberlain let the ball go under his foot, or Maurice Cook missed a chance, there were.
He used to live down the road, Tosh Chamberlain, from here. Ralph McTell, the famous folk singer who had a big hit with Streets of London, was a big Fulham fan, told a great story to sum up Fulham. He said that there was a break in play for an injury to an opponent, and the Fulham players were all standing around talking, and they had the ball, but someone had his foot in the ball, and there were 6 or 7 of them standing around, and it was silence around the ground as this player was treated, and suddenly one voice rang out and said, "Don't just stand there, Fulham, practice!" And that is Fulham to a T.
It is, and of course, the Jimmy Hill, who had a big influence for a short while on my career, and I God bless him, I owe him so much. He was a figure of fun as a player, but he became such an important person, and it was connected with Jimmy that the big change in football, we talk about the Bosman rule now, but the big change in English football was the abolition of the maximum wage in the early 1960s.
Well, that was when he was chairman of the PFA. Later on...
he was playing for Fulham.
Later on, it was him who brought in the idea of 3 points for a win and not 2 points for a win.
He was an innovator.
So it was
But
brilliant.
the maximum wage meant that Johnny Haynes became the first player to earn £100 a week.
Yeah, from £20.
So the maximum wage was 20, and I think it was 14 in the summer. They didn't pay you the full wage when you weren't playing.
Jimmy Hill also tried to merge Fulham with Queen's Park Rangers. He got a little bit too long.
Yeah.
That is not remembered fondly. They came up last time, having been a yo-yo club under Marco Silva, who had succeeded, I think, Scott Parker, and Alexander Mitrovic, who hadn't done it in the Premier League, got a ton of goals. Silva built a team around him. It worked, and it worked so well that Fulham got £50 million for him from a Saudi Arabian club the following summer. I thought that would be the end and they go back down. But he signed Raul Jimenez, who got enough goals in the first half of last season.
Having recovered, hopefully, not perhaps totally fully, from a very serious head injury. So he's a remarkable person to be doing what he's doing.
And then in the second half of the season, he brought through, I've forgotten,
Rodrigo Muniz.
Who and between who cost €8 million originally, and between the two of them, they got 16 league goals last season, and Fulham stayed up. My worry about Fulham this season is they've lost their centre-back partnership for no money. Tosin went on a free transfer into contract to Chelsea. Tosin Adarabayo.
Pretty good.
And
Adarabayo.
Tim Ream, 36 years old, has been let go and has gone back to USA and joined Charlotte. So they'll need a completely new...
Well, worse than that is João Paulinho's finally gone to Bayern Munich and played against Tottenham the other day at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and he is, I think he helped those two that you mentioned and the other defenders who filled in. So that's a gap that's got to be filled to that level as well. There are players who can do it, whether they can do it well enough, we'll have to do.
Where will Emil Smith Rowe fit in?
No, I would say maybe off the front. I mean, he's an attacking player. He can play wide. He looks a very good signing. And it looks as though they might have to score a few goals to get the results. So players like Emil, who's had, first of all, injuries and then found himself just the odd man out, really. than he would have been in most other teams. Now he's got a chance to really show what he's capable of, and we talked about him before. He's vital to Fulham. Looks a shrewd signing. They're pretty good with their recruitment. So
they are, yeah.
We'll see. But it's always a pleasure to go there. And, you and I of our age, we can remember those 1960 crowds and what the ground was like then. And I still find it, the standard commentary position is tremendous. I thought it would be in a big stand. You don't really want to be up too high, but it's got just the angle of sight. The sight lines are absolutely great. So I hope if anyone's listening, I'm very happy to go to games there.
And one of the great moments of football was when Fulham were beating someone 4-1 in the 1970s, and George Best and Rodney Marsh, playing for Fulham, tackled each other.
It was Hereford.
Oh, was it? How did I not know that Martin would know?
I'm pretty sure it was. I was working on the big match, editing the games in those days, and that, because I was around, that got me on the trip to the Fulham trip to Wembley. Also, not too many people remember This Is Your Life. I don't think it was a very popular program in the 70s and 80s, where all stars at all aspects of life really, and the occasional footballer was on. And Alan Mullery, then back at Fulham, captain of Fulham, was itemised for the producers at Thames Television to be a subject for This Is Your Life. And what the big thrill of it, everybody in the family and friends knew that this was going to happen. It had to be kept away from the subject, so that it was a genuine surprise when the presenter Eamon Andrews would come out and catch them doing something. Well, I found myself as part of the entrapment of Alan Mullery. We covered there was a set-up game at Craven Cottage in one afternoon against a local school, and it was all like for publicity and good for the local community. But actually, it was there to get Alan on This Is Your Life. And what we did, we had a camera crew. I was working for ITV, so we went onto the field to get some close-ups, and all the players knew what was going on, but Alan didn't. But he wasn't surprised. We were told that we could go onto the pitch during the game as against schoolboys, and we went up towards Alan, and Eamon Andrews was hidden behind the cameraman, the sound man, and me. And I heard him say, "Which one is he?" And I went, "He's the number 4." And so he went, Alan Mullery, This Is Your Life. And it was, and we all went off to Thames Studios and for the evening. So that's another Fulham memory for me, which I always bore my family if I take any of them to a Fulham game. That's the spot where
Fulham to struggle or Fulham to survive?
To survive, but with a bit of a struggle.
So our last club today is Ipswich, and Ipswich, this small club in rural Suffolk, rural East Anglia, miles really from anywhere. And unbelievably, their last trophy was a while ago now, Division 2 in 1992, which got them back up into the top flight. Their best FA Cup ever was 1978 when they won it. Their best league ever was 1962 when they won it. And their best Europe ever was the UEFA Cup in 1981 when they won it. I mean, they are an extraordinary small club.
Extraordinary, and it's so lovely to see them back. Anyone who's been to Ipswich on a football visit will tell you how hospitable it is, and it's a great ground for atmosphere. And I can't wait to get an assignment to go to Portman Road again. I can remember them winning in the league in 1962. Alf Ramsey, who then suddenly got spirited away by England, and you know the rest, and became Sir Alf Ramsey. And Bobby Robson, who actually, as well as winning the FA Cup, they finished runners-up in the old First Division as well. Sir Bobby. So
Sir Alf,
Sir Bobby, yeah. There's been a lot of. They've made the most of the opportunity they've had. They produced a lot of players of their own, and now they're producing a manager who has taken everybody by surprise and taken football and Suffolk by storm. Kieran McKenna, whose playing career was cut short. Some people go out of the game because of that and live in there. Want to get as far away from football as possible. He's done the opposite. He's gone straight into coaching, and now he's a manager, and it'll be a real test. But he's got a sharp football brain. He's got all the disadvantages of a promotion club. Obviously, we know what happened last year. They can go straight back down again. But I think you'd rather have that year in the limelight, and it may be more than that. Other clubs have gone up and stayed, and some have gone back down and come straight back up in, or pretty straight up, like Bournemouth we've been talking about with the Solanke story. So it's exciting. It's really exciting for Ipswich, and there'll be value for money, but how much money they've got to be valued for is going to be obviously a key.
What do you think made the Ipswich board or hierarchy choose him, McKenna? Because he'd been a youth team coach at Tottenham, a youth team coach at Manchester United. He was promoted to an assistant coach by Jose Mourinho. He was kept on by Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and then Ralph Rangnick. And they took him from there. What made them take him from there?
Well, just like people go talent scouting for players, they do the same for coaches as well. He would have come with probably some great recommendations, maybe from Sir Alec, It still very much got his finger on the pulse of not just Manchester United, but top-level football. And I would also guess that he fitted the pay structure, because sometimes you have to go in low to get to the high numbers. And I'm sure the way it's going, that he'll become a very successful manager. He's got so many years at it. And to get out of the third division of the League One was a great achievement. And then to back that up, particularly, Ipswich is one of those clubs, if the longer it goes without them being in the Premier League, you just get old players' pictures on the wall, and you've got a weight of history around the present day club. And there were some fantastic players who played back in the 60s. Ray Crawford and Ted Phillips got the goals, and Roy Bailey, who was better known in the end as father of Gary Bailey, who kept goal for Manchester United. He was the keeper, and then of course Bobby
They had
Robson.
a left winger called Lightning. Do you remember that? How well named was that?
You've done me there. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought Jimmy Ledbetter was the
Maybe
left winger.
They had a player called.
But he was. He didn't look like a footballer, Ledbetter.
No.
He looked like somebody you might see wandering around the streets. He had no weight. No, he was just a football scruff, really, but with wonderful talent. And Alf Ramsey built a wonderful team. Bobby Robson got into the foreign market, didn't he, with Franz Tyson and Arnold Muren. And then, had the best of players like Paul Mariner, who was an England centre forward. Yeah, Alan Brazil, Trevor Wymark, Brian Talbot, and Roger Osborne, who was the least likely hero going into that final against Arsenal in 1978 when they won the cup, and he scored the goal, and his name is up in lights forever. So, special. Especially, I think all of us who love the romance of football, and that's almost all of you, I'm sure, listening and watching this. And that's what is so attractive about it. We'll look.
They lack Premier League experience in their squad. Today, there's talk of them signing on loan Calvin Phillips. But
Well, I spoke about Calvin Phillips last week, and I do think he deserves a turn of fortune. He did play okay as a centre-back. I thought he might have played in the Community Shield. He didn't get on in the Community Shield. They brought the central defenders back who hadn't played any minutes of the tour in the USA, didn't go to the USA. Apart from Guardiola did, but he played on the left. So Phillips would have played as a right-sided centre-back. And he could do a job there. But obviously they're trying to rekindle the form that got him into the England team for such a long period. And he did play as a defender for a time at Leeds in his early years. So I think they might get two players in one, and one who's got a lot to prove and got the big incentive to do well, and I think has got the character to overcome the recent difficulties.
It'd be hard for them, though, won't it?
Yeah, it'd be very hard for them. Very hard for them. Every point will seem like a diamond, but you never know. And sometimes in changing a team that's got promoted, you lose the essence of why they got promoted. So I hope that the fantastic spirit that they had to show that, and they did take on a lot of. In the end, they took on a few pundits as well who doubted them, didn't they? But they are just wide-eyed, waiting for it to happen, and it's going to start very soon.
There you go, Ipswich, right? Struggles, but who knows? Okay, that is last trophy. Next podcast, we'll have another 5 clubs: Leicester, Liverpool, Manchester City, Manchester United, and Newcastle. Some big guns in there. But right now, the big guns we're looking at will be in 3 of the best.
And he makes them pay.
3 of the best. He's made them pay, and that completes a wonderful hat-trick.
Martin, your young player.
Well, I was going to wax lyrical about Oscar Bob, and I'm still going to do that. But of course, the sad news in the last 24 hours or so, as we're recording here, that he's managed to fracture a bone in his leg, the fibula, I think, with a non-contact type of injury. Whether there's any footage out there to show it's happened, I'm sure Manchester City wouldn't release that if there was. But very sad, because he was in the Community Shield where I started my season at Wembley last weekend. He had a wonderful tour. I saw quite a few of those games in preparation, as commentators do, looking at what's available of the pre-season matches on our own screens at home, and he was excellent. And he showed, this is one of your favourite themes, he is a left-footed coming in and scoring
But
a
he
goal.
can do it.
He went down the outside and crossed. We've got a couple of Man United fans in the room with us who help us with the production, who were very, very, very sad to see that cross from Oscar Bob.
With his right foot.
With his right foot. Bernardo Silva scoring with a brave header. And then, United, who played very well in the game, ended up losing the shootout. But that moment from Oscar Bob was a salvation for Pep Guardiola, who was getting more and more frustrated on the sideline. Don't ever anybody tell me that this is a pre-season game. This is a game with silverware at stake, and you had 2 managers desperate to win it. And Pep got his hands on it at the end, having lost the last 3, incidentally. It would have been there. They were so close to losing a 4th consecutive Shield. But of course, to get to the Shield, you have to have the silverware in the first place. So Oscar Bob, they're talking about 2 or 3 months. That's such a shame. But he's young enough to recover, make a full recovery. It sounds like the sort of injury that it's probably breaks are sometimes better than torn ligaments and things like that.
He's very small. He's very dynamic. He's fast. He's talented.
He's Norwegian, but they sing he's one of our own. The City fans sing that too. He's obviously come through the academy.
But he's when you see him, you can see why maybe Cole Palmer going with that right-sided, left-footed player. He's more of a pacey dribbler than Palmer. He's more of a forward, but he's very dynamic, and his movement off the ball is terrific.
I managed to avoid saying bobbing and weaving, because that's what he does. And it's a sort of thing that commentators get slaughtered for with some justification, I think.
But I mean, Norway, they didn't qualify for the last World Cup. They didn't qualify for the Euros. They now got Haaland, Odegaard, and Bob. I mean,
well, they're not going to have Oscar for their first few rounds of the Nations League, are they? So, but it is a shame. But as I say, it would be easy to pull him out of the my young player. But from what I saw last weekend, and wishing him all the very best for a speedy recovery.
Looks top drawer. My young player is someone we've had before. I'm going back to him, Jude Bellingham. Why? Because during the Euros, and especially at the end of the Euros, I went on and on. He should have played next to Declan Rice. He should have not. Kobe Mainoo wasn't ready. He should have driven England forward, and all the options that Gareth Southgate would then have had: Kane at 10 and Watkins coming in, or Palmer at 10, or Foden coming across to 10 and Gordon coming. It would have been a better structure. I kept saying that. Well, how were Real Madrid going to fit him in to the new setup? And that Carlo Ancelotti went with a simple 4-3-3, played him on the left of midfield, and boy oh boy, Jude Bellingham as an out-and-out midfielder was flipping wonderful.
Well, that's what he's been, really, isn't it? It's only suddenly, I know he scored goals in Dortmund as well, but generally that sort of box-to-box midfield role is where you sort of thought he was going to put his imprint on any team he played for, including the national team. But circumstance, and we talked last week about what Ancelotti would do. It's exactly what we expected him to do, to fit the pieces in, get the best players on the pitch. That's the skill of coaching. If you put the formation before the fellas, you're going to be wrong. It's how your best players play.
Well, I think he's got to play next to Declan Rice from now on, and I think that England will be the better for it. But I think,
I thought you might say one holding midfield player is enough.
Yeah, but that's so as well, because he drives the team forward. Although he didn't drive the team forward by dribbling, he drove the team forward by passing and
moving. Go, yeah. He wants to score a goal. Declan's desperate to score goals as well, but he just hasn't got that. I don't think he feels he's got the freedom to actually just make a selfish run into the box. But Jude's encouraged to do that.
I've seen him score a couple of last-minute winners.
But most of his goals are usually shots from the edge of the area.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on to old player. Your old player.
Well, I've got Lee Carsley as people I haven't really been talking about. He's playing, obviously now he's the interim England manager, which is great credit to him. And he's a very good choice under his tutelage. The under-21s won a trophy. He was very much at the heart of that. He's coming through the same coaching system as Gareth Southgate did. Unlike Gareth, he didn't play his international football for England, but he is English, representing the Republic of Ireland with much distinction. And he's served his time in football, really. I've got two memories of him, which perhaps are appropriate to mention at this time. One, I got stuck on the M25 going to West Ham against Everton after a hurricane, and the debris had closed the M25. And most commentators would do the same as me. You leave very early, so you've got some wriggle room. But I was at a standstill between the junction that I get on, which is junction 9, and the next junction, junction 8, on the way to the Dartford crossing to come back into London to go to West Ham. During this period of stationary traffic, a police car inched up the hard shoulder, and I was able to shout through, got the passenger window down, shout across out, "Excuse me, can you help? I'm commentating at West Ham for Sky Sports this afternoon." And the reply was, "Well, they better get somebody else then." So that wasn't very helpful. But the purpose of this story is I did get there in the end. It finished West Ham 0, Everton 1, and Lee Carsley scored the goal. So he's irrevocably linked with that, So it was it wasn't a very good game, but Lee did well. And the other memory is much more recent, but in his time at Brentford, I was coaching at Hampton Richmond, and Brentford very close to that. So we arranged a friendly against their B team, or maybe even their under-21 team when they still had one. So we were very pleased. A lot of interest. The Brentford fans would come to our ground, and we were hoping for a good night. And I sort of wanted to make sure everything was done and dusted properly, so that Brentford could not in any way feel that we mistreated them and not given them the proper respect. And so I was waiting for them to arrive, and they arrived in a minibus driven by Lee Carsley.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I thought, well, he's come from being a Premier League player, international footballer, and he doesn't mind getting his hands dirty doing this.
Was he the coach?
He was the coach, yeah, but he drove them there, and he then went to the dugout, and then he drove them back. And I thought, I made a little joke about it at the time. I said, well, wow, from where you've been to where you are now. From there, the bus driver for the minibus for the Brentford under-21s or the B team to being interim England manager. And I think the quality that made him humble enough to do that job is part of the reason where I think he might even go on from being the interim manager to being the full replacement of Gareth Southgate.
I've said that all along. I think he'll get the job.
Yeah. I hope so. I hope so, because I like him. As I say, he's been kind to me on a couple of occasions in that respect. And I do. I know it's not the most fashionable thing to say, but I do think the national teams, not just England, I think the national teams should be managed by a person from their own country.
Yeah, so do I. Yeah, otherwise it's pointless. It's just it's not international. Right, my old player is the person who we think will be his assistant, though it's not been announced yet, is Ashley Cole, who was his assistant with England under-21s. I just want to say a couple of things about Ash. first of all, I think he is amongst the most football intelligent defenders I've ever come across. He was regularly in his time at Chelsea having to defend 1 against 2 because the left wingers in front of him didn't really like tracking back, and he just knew what to do. How did he know what to do? It was natural. He just knew what to do, and it never ever bothered him. Well, it did bother him because he used to have a few arguments about it, but it never bothered him in terms of performance. He was so intelligent, and he would force them into doing things that they didn't want to do. I can't emphasize just how intelligent his football was defensively, and that's what made him a special left back. But the other thing I want to say about him, I mean, he got obviously a lot of images from his love life and his married life and everything else, and his off the pitch life altogether. But if you were going into the training ground like I was every day, then his off the pitch life was he'd be one of the first in at the training ground, and not in a professional way, just in a love of football way. And he would go and plonk himself in the physio's room where loads of other people were having massage. He didn't often have a massage. He just wanted to sit there and talk football and be with footballers and talk the banter. And at the end of training, he'd go in and he'd go back and he'd sit in the physio room and he'd just be sociable with football people. And he would spend as long of his day as he possibly could in that room with those people, because he just loved football. And now he's throwing that love of football back into the coaching side. And that is what, when I see him walk out onto the England bench, will be in my mind, not all the other stuff that maybe is a bit
He's a Premier League Hall of Famer. I went to the induction ceremony a few months ago. Excellent, thoroughly deserved, and a top guy, Ash.
Okay, player this week.
Well, this is I suppose a niche one for me, but it's very personal because it's probably the best player that I've ever had the privilege to coach, and that's Jamal Lowe, who's now at Sheffield Wednesday, and in the first weekend of the season in the Championship, he made his debut for Sheffield Wednesday against Wayne Rooney's team, Plymouth Argyle. He scored the opening goal. He set up the second, which was a crazy own goal, but he had the last touch of a Sheffield Wednesday player. And generally, and he played full 90 minutes, he's not, to my mind, the number 9 that he wears, but he's playing that position in a much higher level of football. For us, the year I had with him was at Hampton and Richmond, and he played on the left of a 3 behind 1. And the one was Nicky Kabamba, who last year had a fantastic season with Barnett and had a tilt with Jamal at Portsmouth. We sold them to Portsmouth as a pair, really. But for Jamal, who came to us as a wounded animal, he had 7 or 8 league games. It was actually his 300th league appearance on Sunday when he played against Plymouth. But I think 7 of those were before he came to Hampton, when he was at Barnet as a kid, 17 years old. And he was in the team with a lot of raw talent. But Edgar Davids, a very famous player of his time and a pretty ruthless Dutch coach, as it turned out, basically put him off football. And he went into the non-league scene, and he was never going to have a career in football. But we got lucky. We got him at the time where he wanted to give up everything. He was a PE teacher. That was how he was earning his living. I think he was on £250 a week with us for a calendar year from January through to the next January. We won a league. He scored 40-odd goals in 60 appearances. One game, we left him on the bench, a local cup tie, and he said, I've got to come on. I said, no, we're winning. We don't need, you're too valuable to us. Anyway, he badgered the manager and finally got on for the last 10 minutes. He scored 4. He was that good. And he played for England C. So we cultivated him into an international. Now, of course, he's gone in senior international football with Jamaica. So he'll be hopefully getting a chance under Steve McLaren. So 300 games, he's 30, I can't believe that. And he's been to Portsmouth, to Wigan, to Swansea, to Bournemouth, back to Swansea again. I think he had a loan at QPR as well. So he has racked up the games. And he thoroughly deserves every minute. And I messaged him after the game saying it was a great watch, but you've only just started a new club. You've got to keep it going. You know the standards that he brought to his own game. We were just lucky. And it was a lovely year, and he's a lovely guy.
My player is Marcus Thuram, who didn't have a good Euros, had a fantastic year last season with Inter Milan. I went to the pre-season friendly at Stamford Bridge, Chelsea, Inter Milan. First time I've seen him in the flesh. Boy, is he a unit. He is bigger and stronger and has more presence than I realised. He was terrific. He was strong. He was skillful. He was a leader of the line. He could link play, and he scored a fabulous goal from just inside the penalty area, banging a left footer into the corner. I know he hasn't always been a centre forward, and in fact, when Inter bought him from Borussia Mönchengladbach, you didn't really know if he was a wide attacker or a central striker. They've turned him into a central striker. He plays up front, normally with Lautaro Martinez, but he's another one who hasn't come back off Copa America yet. So he played with Correa, the ex-Atletico Madrid player.
Of course, his dad was the best right back
in the world.
France, when the world was certainly for France anyway.
Yeah, Lilian
Thuram. So it's sometimes you think, well, he's following in father's footsteps, but he's not actually. He's much further up the pitch, isn't he? Yeah.
Although Thuram scored his only two international goals.
Only 2 goals
in the semi-final
of the World Cup. Yeah, that is one of the astonishing facts. Yeah.
I think Marcus Thuram is a top player. I think Didier Deschamps made a mistake not playing him at the centre forward and playing Mbappe there in that first game, and it kind of went a bit south from there, France's attack. But I was really, really impressed with him. And Inter Milan got him on a free. He was out of contract at Mönchengladbach, so a number of Premier League clubs could and should have got him because he would have been a star in the Premier League. Top player. Very impressed. Okay, that is 3 of the best. We move on to Voice of Passion.
Voice of Passion.
And the Voice of Passion this week are going to be my predictions. So I'm going to be very quick on this, Martin. My predictions for the season. I'm going to give you a top 4. Now, before I go into the top 4, if you look at last season's table, it was just so 3-club dominated. I'm not sure people realise just how much. Manchester City won it with 91 points. Not a great total in the modern era, 91 points. Arsenal pushed them all the way, 89 points. Liverpool were third with 82 points. And then, bang, 4th place Aston Villa had 68 points, 14 points behind third place, and 23 points behind the champions. Quite extraordinary. That is a big gap for anyone to fill.
I wait this with interest. We've talked. I don't know what your 4 are. So.
Well, I'm going to... Manchester City and Arsenal, for me, will again lead the way. I think Liverpool will suffer without Jurgen Klopp because it's just such a big departure.
All I can say on that is, from what I gather, and I was talking to an ex-Liverpool player only a few days ago, the players are having Arne Slot.
That's good.
Which is great. It's just a simple statement, but that is the key to going forward.
I'm going to go Arsenal over Manchester City. Arsenal will do it this year over Manchester City. Why am I saying that? The beginning of the season, I think City are going to be really struggling. They go into the season with Walker, Stones, Foden and Rodri not having played one pre-season game. With Silva having played 10 minutes and with De Bruyne and Ake having played a stoppage time. I think they'll struggle for the first month of the season. I know they have before, but I think they'll struggle more this time. I think that Pep is factoring in the Club World Cup and looking at all the games that his team might have to play, and that's one of the reasons.
They've lost they took the money for Alvarez, and now Oscar Bob has had this leg fracture, so we expect a little bit of activity really between them.
Although they bought Saviola, who could. It was a winger, so he
was quite tidy when he came on actually, and of course he scored his penalty in the shootout.
Yeah, so but I just think Arsenal have made one big signing. I think they're ready, but I have no idea. It was so close last season. I have no idea. But I'm going Arsenal over Manchester City. Liverpool have taken a big chance with Arne Slot. Yeah, the players are having him, but the Dutch haven't done well in the Premier League. They never won the Premier League. They won a few FA Cups. Ruud Gullit was the first overseas manager to win a major trophy in England. First black manager to win a major trophy in England. Who was the second?
You don't throw me with that. No.
There hasn't been one.
No. I was going to say.
So
I was struggling to find
Premier
one.
League hierarchies need to do better with their diversity. But Dutch people, Gus Hiddink won it, Louis van Gaal won it, and of course Erik ten Hag's won it. So they've won FA Cups, and Ten Hag's won the League Cup, but they haven't done really well in the Premier League. And they haven't bought anyone. As we talk, they haven't signed anyone, Liverpool. And I just think without fresh blood, one or two fresh blood, you will struggle. So I'm having them in my top four. I'm tinkering between third and fourth. Who will be the other team in the top four? I think it's between Aston Villa, Tottenham, Chelsea, Newcastle, and Manchester United, who made up the top 8 last season. United should have defenders more fit through the season, which I think will make them better contenders. But I just can't see them getting the goals. They haven't improved their forward line at all. Newcastle will be better defensively if Nick Pope and the 2 centre-backs stay fit. And they'll have Tonali back, and I think they'll be stronger as a result. Chelsea, if Chelsea comes 6th, I'll be very happy. I just don't see them getting it together beyond that. Tottenham, I think if Vicario and Van der Dem, is it?
Van der Ven.
Van der Ven.
Nicky Van der Ven.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've got some improving to do, but they need to get back to how they were in the first half of the season. And that's quite possible. Adapting, they could do that. I'm a big fan of Sarr in the midfield. I miss Basuma's party, but I'm sure when he gets over the hangover,
he's only missing one game, I think.
When he gets over the hangover, he'll survive. They've signed Archie Gray from Leeds, who can play fullback or midfield. They've kept Richarlison. I don't think Solanke will get the goals he got last season, but I think that he will give them a focal point in attack that they haven't had. And
how he goes with Son is the key, isn't it? And if they strike up a real partnership, then
I think they will be a better team for having him as a footballing player there. Aston Villa, I don't think will cope with the Champions League and the demands. I don't think they'll be
all the changes, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they had the 6th oldest team average age, wasn't it? And they bought a lot of youngsters, but I think they'll struggle to repeat that. I'm going for Newcastle. I think if everyone stays fit, I think they'll get the goals and they'll kick the goals out. I'm going for Newcastle to tip it ahead of Manchester United for 4th place. But I'm actually going to say Newcastle 3rd and Liverpool 4th. So that's my top 4: Arsenal, Manchester City, Newcastle, Liverpool. I only just decided that at that moment. Newcastle 3rd, Liverpool 4th. So that's on the last day of the season. You are
by far in the majority, Neil. I just don't see any value in doing this because it's going to happen. The excitement is what happens, not how you balance what happens against your predictions. Just let it flow. One thing about the Premier League last year, 1,246 goals. And I was involved in a Premier League briefing, and 50 were disallowed through VAR that were given and then were actually taken away by the VAR intervention. But I did ask the question of how many were added on that were disallowed on field. And so did we get something back from our 50? And they reckoned about 50. They didn't have the exact figures, about 50. And so I think I accept 30-odd goals being ruled out over a period of 8 or 9 months with all these games, 380 games. But the goals, it's fantastic. The kind of football, it's the most goals scored in a Premier League season, and we're well into the 30s now, aren't we? And of course, the first 3 seasons had more games. They had 42 games, yeah. So, and there were more scored last season than in any of those 3 seasons with the extra games. So, bring on the goals, and then we get our joy of football now.
I'm going for 6 clubs battling against relegation. Southampton, Ipswich coming up. Nottingham Forest still, and 3 maybe unlikely ones: Brentford and Wolves. I think Wolves. How can you sell your captain Kilman? And now they've sold Neto. I don't think it'll be an easy season for Wolves. I did have Bournemouth in there as well, but they've gone and signed a replacement for Solanke. You've seen him play.
Yeah. Evan Nelson? Yeah, he's...
Porto and Brazil.
I saw him play for Porto. He's got power, pace, eye for goal. He played in a very good team, so you can always judge strikers a little bit carefully when they're playing in good teams. But I do think, they obviously had him lined up. And they've got the money for Solanke, so they've probably got a bit more to spend. If necessary. I think it's about 3/5 of the price that they had to spend. So they've got some money to spend still. Listen, you're the one who's doing the predicting. Wolves, I'm just looking now. I mean, you're turning us a surprise. Brentford finished 16th last season, and we still wait to see whether Ivan Toney, who was the big miss last season, whether he'll still be there. Wolves were 14th, and Gary O'Neill did brilliantly to get them to 14th. He did a rescue job at Bournemouth the season before, and then last season with Wolves. So he's obviously got talent. Promoted clubs will always be in jeopardy, I think, because that's the way it is. I don't know what we're going to do to change that. Well, money rules. The richest clubs usually are the ones that finish highest. That's the only prediction I'll make.
Okay, I'm going Southampton, Brentford, and Wolves going now.
Okay,
Bournemouth transfer.
I'll be throwing that in your face over the next few months, that's for sure.
The one that might save them. Okay, that's it, apart from stoppage time.
Stoppage time.
Real Madrid won the UEFA Super Cup 2-0 against Atalanta. How was Carlo Ancelotti going to do it? He did it by simply having a simple 4-3-3 with Tchouaméni holding. Camavinga was injured. Tchouaméni holding in the midfield. Bellingham on his left. Valverde on his right. And a front 3 of Rodrigo on the right. Vinicius on the left. And playing the Benzema role was Kylian Mbappe, except he couldn't be more different from Benzema. He can't hold the ball up. He wants the ball on the move. And that is how Real Madrid are going to play. If you play 4-3-3, do you think it's that easy to play without a focal point up front and just all with movement and pace and skill?
Yeah, I think it's actually a really hard job for what you call a conventional centre forward to do. I always believed that it was better with and we do get it with an attacking midfield player making a second striker sometimes, but basically that one player. I mean, you only have to look at how isolated Erling Haaland is, who's got the best goal scoring record of anybody at the moment, and he gets very few touches of the ball. So and they paid fortunes for him. Well, he's worth fortunes. So you've got to find other ways to do it. So I don't think it matters. I think as long as you've got somebody you can play it into, and if you've got the width and you've got the pace and you've got the individual ability, I mean, just get him on the pitch. I mean, that's all I'd be worried about if Carlo Ancelotti. If I can get Vinicius and Mbappe playing 80-90% of my games, I know I'm going to win a very high percentage of those games. So,
do you think it'll be as easy for them to be good against the better teams without?
Yeah, probably because they might attack them, in which case, it's set up for the counter-attack, isn't it? At that level, of course, there's a huge amount of data goes into the preparation of games, and there will be times where the sheer individuality, I mean, we both love football because of the team element of it, but we end up talking about individuals all the time. And it's the gluing together of the individuals that makes the difference between the good and the great. And Carlo Ancelotti has proved time and time again, club after club after club, that he can solve this puzzle. And I look forward to watching them. I think La Liga is a very good standard of football to watch, and to win that league. It's just because you're Real Madrid and they keep doing it. Every season, there's a story behind it. Every season is done. There are no gimmies. I really don't believe that. There might be the odd game where we say in this country, well, hang on, the bottom team can always beat the top team. It proved that happens so often on a one-off basis. And maybe that doesn't happen quite so often in La Liga. Possibly it does. I don't check on those sort of things. But I love the football. I love the passion of the crowd. And actually, it's quite a nice place to go to in the middle of our winter to see a game or two as well. Yeah. So they're a legendary football club, and Atalanta have done very well to be in it. It's a bit like getting into the Community Shield, isn't it? You've done extraordinarily well in the previous season to be even in this fixture. If you lose it, so what?
Yeah, no, I agree. But I was just so pleased with Mbappe's second half performance, because I thought he'd struggle as a one-off centre forward. How wrong was I? I thought he was superb in the second.
Well, I was going to say he's got his nose for goals back, but he's got his nose back, hasn't he? that might just have been the deciding factor.
Martin Tyler.
Neil Barnett.
From both of us.
See you.
That's right. That's it. Thanks for listening, watching. Don't forget the Patreon to get more involved. Don't forget Substack.com, The Joy of Football, it's called there as well, to read Martin and me. And don't forget to follow us weekly on the podcast. And the next one we will have looking at Leicester, Liverpool, Manchester United, Manchester City and Newcastle in last trophy. They've all won one pretty recently. See you then.